Hello, seventh block, and welcome to the first segment of your reading homework. It's right there. Sweet, it's right there. Just go get it and finish it. And welcome to the first segment of your reading homework. This is pages 141 to 150. Just a reminder, you need 3 annotations. Please follow the format. All right, page 141. They all had the same idea and didn't have to tell each other. You've kept us waiting all this time, so let's see how you like it. Bet you're in a hurry to get warm, too. Get a move on, the chief escort shouted. Get a move on, front rank. The hell they'd get a move on. They trailed along with their eyes on the ground like they were on their way to the funeral. They didn't have a thing to lose now. They'd be the last back in camp anyways. The guards hadn't given them a square deal, so let them yell their heads off as much as they liked. The escort chief went on shouting at them for a while, but he saw it was no use. They wouldn't go any faster, but he couldn't tell the guards to shoot at them for this. The prisoners were sticking to the law and marching in their column by lines of 5. The escort chief didn't have the right to make them go any faster. In the mornings, that's what saved their lives. They went out to the job real slow. Anyone who went fast didn't stand a chance to live out his time in the camp. The way you got too hot before you even started the job and you wouldn't last long. So they took their own sweet time, and all you could hear was the snow crunching under their boots. Some of them talked a little, but others didn't bother. Shukov tried to think what it was had gone wrong in the camp this morning. Then it came to him. The sick list. Funny, he'd forgot all about it at work. The medics would be seeing people about now. He could still make it if he skipped supper, but that pain was pretty much gone. He wasn't even sure they'd bother to see if he had a fever. He'd just be wasting his time. He'd gotten over it with the quacks. Those guys could be the death of you. He forgot all about the medics now and started thinking about how to get a little more for supper. What he hoped was Cesar might have gotten a new package from home. There hadn't been one for quite a while, and it was high time. And now, all at once, something happened in the column, like a wave going through it, and they all got out of step. The column sort of jerked forward and buzzed like a swarm of bees. The fellows in the back, that's where Shukov was, had to run now to keep up with the men out in front. Shukov could see what it was clearly all about when the columns cleared a rise they'd been passing. Way over the plain, there was another column heading from the camp right across their path. These fellows must have spotted them too and put a spurt on. This must be fellows from the tool factory. There were about 300 of them, so they had a lousy luck too and kept waiting around. What had happened with them? Sometimes they had to stay on to finish work on some machine or others, but it wasn't so tough for them. They were inside all day and kept warm at least. Now they'd have to see who'd make it first. They started to run, and the guards ran with them. The escort chief was yelling, "No straggling back there, bunch up at the back." Why the hell was he yelling? Didn't he see they were just doing that? Somebody forgot what they'd been talking or thinking about. There was only one thing they'd had their minds on now, get ahead of those guys and beat them to it. So everything was turned upside down. Everything was all mixed up now. Bitter was sweet and sweet was bitter. Even the guards were with them. They were all in it together. The people they hated now were the guys over in that other column. They all felt better and they weren't half as mad. "Come on, get going up there," the fellows in back were shouting. The column was now one of the streets that led into the camp, and they had lost sight of the guys from the tool works behind a housing block on another street. But they were still racing each other. Now they were in the street. The going was easier, and it wasn't so rough and underfoot for the guards either. They were bound to beat those others to it. Another reason they had to get ahead of that bunch from the tool works, those guys got a real going over from the Friskers and took up the longest time at the guards' room of anybody. It all started with the killing of those stool pigeons. The higher-ups had gotten the idea. It was the fellows in the tool works who had made the knives and brought them in. That's why they frisked them like they did before they let them through. Way back last fall, the ground was getting cold by then. They started yelling at them every time. "Take your boots off, tool works. Hold them up in your hands." So they had to stand there in their bare feet for the frisk. And now in the freezing cold, the guards made them take off just one of their boots, and they pointed at the one they wanted. "Come on, take off your right boot, and you there, take off the left one." So they had to hop around on one leg and turn them upside down and shake out their foot cloths to show they didn't have a knife. Shukov had heard. He didn't know if it was true or not. These fellows from the tool works had brought in a couple of volleyball posts in the summer, and they'd hid all the knives in those posts, 10 in each, and knives were still turning up all over the place. They went past a new recreation hall in the double, past some houses in the carpentry shop, and turned a corner on the stretch that went up to the guard room. The column let out a great roar like it was one man. This was just the spot they wanted to be, where the two streets came together. The fellows from the tool shop were way behind, 500 yards down the road. They could let up now. Everyone in the column was on top of the world. It was like a bunch of scared rabbits gloating over another of scared rabbits. Now they were back at the camp. It was the same as they had left it in this morning. It was night then, and it was night now. There were plenty of lights around the fence, but it was nothing to what they had around the guardroom. The place the friskers were waiting for them was light as day. Before they could get there, the second in charge of the escort yelled, "Halt!" He handed his gun to a soldier and ran up to the column. They weren't supposed to come too near the men with their guns. "All those on the right with firewood, throw it over here." The fellows on the outside weren't trying to hide it. Little bundles of firewood started flying through the air. Some of them tried to pass the stuff to men in the middle of the column, but these other guys yelled at them. "They'll take it from everyone else and all because of you. Throw it over there like he tells you." Who was the prisoner's worst enemy? The guy next to him? If they didn't fight each other, it'd be another story. "Forward, march," the second in charge shouted, so they went over to the guard room. 5 streets came together at the guard room. An hour before, they'd all been crowded with the men coming in from the other sites. When all these streets were finished, the main square in the town they were building would be right here by the guard room, where they were going to frisk them. And the people who'd be coming to live in this new town would parade here on the big days, just like the prisoners were pouring in now. The warders were already at the guard room warming themselves. They came out and stood across from the prisoners. "Open up your coats and jackets," and they put their arms out, sort of getting ready for their frisk, same as in the morning. It wasn't so bad opening up their clothes now. They were nearly home. That's just what they said, home. You didn't have any other home to think about when you were out there working. They were frisking the guys at the front of the column now, and Shukov went over to Cesar and said, "Cesar Markovich, when we're through, I'll go to the package room right away and hold a place for you in line." Cesar turned around. The ends of his neat black mustache were all white with frost. Then Cesar said to him, "What's the point of that, Ivan Denisovich? Suppose I don't have any package." "Maybe not, but what the hell? I'll hang around for 10 minutes, and if you don't come, I'll go over to the barracks." What Shukov had at the back of his mind was, even if Cesar hadn't gotten anything, he would sell his place in line to some other guy. It looked like Cesar wanted a package real bad. "Okay, Ivan Denisovich, go over and get in line, but don't wait more than 10 minutes. They were getting close to the friskers now. Shukov had nothing to hide from them today, and he didn't worry. He took his time undoing his coat and the piece of rope around his jacket. And though he didn't think he had anything on him, he shouldn't. His 8 years in camp had made him careful. So he shoved his hand in the pocket on the knee of his pants to make sure it was empty. And there was the piece of steel he'd pick up on the sight. He'd only taken it so it wouldn't go to waste, and he didn't mean to bring it back to camp. He didn't mean to bring it back, but he had, and it'd be a great pity to throw it away. He could grind it down into a small knife for mending boots or making clothes. If he'd meant to smuggle it, he'd have found a good way to hide it. But there were only 2 rows of men in front of him at the friskers, and the first 5 were already there. He had to think fast. He could throw it out in the snow while he was still covered by the backs of the men in front. They'd find it later, but they'd never know where it came from. Or he could try and get it through. If they found it on him and said it was a knife, he could get 10 days in the can. But a knife like that could bring something in. It could mean more bread. He couldn't stand throwing it away, so he slipped it in one of his mittens. Now the row of 5 in front was ordered up to the friskers, so there was just 3 of them left out. There, under the bright light, Sanka, Shukov, and the young men from 32 had helped bring the Moldavian in. There was only 3 of them to 5 warders, so Shukov could play it smart and choose between the 2 on the right. He picked the old one with gray whiskers instead of the young one with the red cheeks. Of course, the old man knew his stuff and would have no trouble finding it if he wanted. But the thing was, he was old, so he must be fed up with his job. Then Shukov took off both mittens, the one with a piece of steel in the other, and held them in one hand. He stuck the empty mitten out a little in front. He put the piece of rope he used for a belt in the same hand, opened his jacket wide, and lifted up the sides of his coat. He'd never put himself out for the friskers like this before, but now he wanted to make them feel he had nothing to hide. He went up to the old man with the gray whiskers. The old man ran his hands over Shukov's back and sides and felt the pocket on his knee and the sides of his coat and jacket, but there was nothing there. To make sure before he let him go, he tried the mitten with nothing in it that Shukov had stuck under his nose. Shukov was in a sweat. If this warder did the same with the other one, he'd wind up in the cooler with 8 ounces of bread a day and hot food only every 3rd day. He thought how weak and hungry he'd be there and how hard it would be to get back on his feet, lean and half-starved as he was. And he prayed hard as he could. God in heaven, help me and keep me out of the can. All this went through his head when the warder felt for the first mitten and then reached out for the one behind it. He had tried them both at once if Shukov hadn't held them in the same hand. But then the chief warder, he wanted to get the thing over with as soon as he could, shouted to the guards, "Let's have the fellow from the tool works." So the old man with the gray whiskers didn't bother with Shukov's other mitten and waved him through. Shukov went to catch up with the others. They were already lined up by 5s between 2 long wooden rails, like the ones they hitch horses to in marketplaces. It made a kind of paddock. He felt like he was walking on air, but he didn't say a word of thanks because there wasn't any time, there was no sense in it now. The guards who'd brought their column in got out of the way to make room for the escorts who were marching the tool works in. They were waiting for their chief. They'd pick up all the firewood the column had thrown down before their frisk. The firewood the warders took was piled up by the guardroom. The moon was going up higher all the time, and the night cold was getting stronger. On his way to the guardroom to sign in the 463 men, the escort chief stopped and had a word with him. Praka, this was Volkovo's deputy duty, and shouted, Case 460. The Moldavian, who tried to keep out of sight in the middle of the column, gave a sigh and came up to the rail on the right. All right, guys, that's the end of your first section of reading. That's the end of your first section of reading. You have 2 more. God bless you and have a good day.